Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm your host, Dennis Ward. Our guest this week is a former colleague of mine. Tim Fontaine has been a journalist in television, print, radio, and web for nearly 2 decades, working for APTN National News and CBC, among other places. More recently, he filed stories with headlines like Canada to present full-grown Indigenous man to royal couple as engagement gift. Proposed pipeline will cross through every single Indigenous community in the country. And Assembly of First Nations annual Boys of Summer calendar missing printing deadline. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I've always had a great deal of respect for you and learned a lot from you while we worked together here at APTN.
It's probably lessening quite a bit.
But some of these stories seem like they're a bit off. You want to explain some of your recent work?
Yeah, I stopped being a quote unquote like real journalist about 4 months ago, and I was moving more towards trying to establish myself as a writer. And so I started doing these exercises, and because all I have done for the past, how many years is write news stories, that's what came out when I started doing these things. And I consider myself a humorous guy. I've got a sense of humor, so I started writing these things, and they were based on tweets that I did over the past few years, because I would occasionally tweet kind of silly things, and people seemed to like them. So I just translated it into this site, and so in a couple of hours I put together a website and just made this satirical Walking Eagle News, just as a way to sort of set fire to my journalism career, because I've been wanting to move away from being a daily news guy, and this was not how I intended to do it, but it seems to be doing a pretty good job of that.
The stories, most of them involve politics, and I understand you grew up in a political family. Yeah. What was that like, and how's it fed into Walking Eagle News?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's what helped me in my journalism career was having an understanding of Indigenous politics and First Nations politics before I even became a journalist. I grew up in a political family. I mean, my uncle was the Grand Chief and then the National Chief, and I've had chiefs in my family and people involved in politics, and just sitting around our kitchen table and my dad and uncles talking about politics the way other families talk about hockey, right? So I mean, I kind of grew up knowing who some of these people were, and that helped set the flavor for this as well, because there is a lot of humor in our communities, and so combining those two was just natural.
You mentioned you got a start in comedy with the Crow Hop Cafe, yes. I believe. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was like we kind of likened ourselves to like the Indigenous Monty Python. So because it was a comedy troupe and sort of an entertainment night that we started in Regina in about 2001, and that was before I was a journalist, or before I was a full-time journalist, and so I thought I was going to go into acting or performing at least, anyways, and that's kind of where I got the idea of satire, I think, too. That it was kind of born way back then, and then I became a real journalist, and 2 decades later, I found myself wondering, like, whatever happened to that? So why not try and pursue that again? So. Yeah.
You did have a successful career, as you mentioned, yes. Nearly 2 decades, telling important stories that meant a lot to a lot of people. But you said it led to some frustrating times. What was the frustration?
Well, journalism is a tough game, and covering Indigenous issues can be even tougher, because you become saturated with tragedy often, or saturated with injustice, and it really wears on you. And I was tired of it. I think I was burnt out when I left CBC just about 4 months ago, and I was done with it. I just thought, you know what, I can't do this anymore. And part of it is because when you're a journalist, I mean, there are stronger journalists than me who can, like yourself. I mean, there's people that continue to do this, but I couldn't do it anymore, because journalism is a funny thing when you can't call someone a liar, even though they are, and you can't say things. We put racism in quotes, often. APTN doesn't, and I commend them for that. But to not be able to speak what I think is the truth was really frustrating. And so this, through humor, I can do that. I can call a spade because it's what I do now. I'm not bound by journalistic standards. At least not daily news standards, right? So it's a different kind of journalism now.
Shortly after you stepped away from your daily news gig, you started writing some op-eds about the Liberal government, Senator Lynn Bayak. What was it like putting out those first couple of stories?
Terrifying at first because again, it goes against every journalistic standard you have, right? I mean, that was really, I initially thought, okay, well, I'll write some analysis pieces and draw on this experience that I've developed as a journalist. And then I thought, well, why not? Like, why? Somebody described it as like a dam breaking because it was all of this thing that was inside me that needed to come out. And so it was scary at first because the evening before the first story was going to publish, I just thought, like, what are people going to say, right? I mean, does this destroy an entire career that I built? And I don't think it is. I mean, people have done it. Neil MacDonald was a journalist for years before he became an op-ed writer. And so I was happy with that for a while because people seemed to appreciate what I was writing. But again, it wasn't yet what I wanted to do. And so moving towards humor and making people laugh was far more satisfying than that ever was.
What was the reaction you got to some of those op-eds?
People appreciated it, I think. I think people were shocked that I was saying these things because I like to think that I was quite unbiased when I was a journalist, and I think, you know, like I like many journalists, I worked very hard at doing that, right? I didn't want to, I was careful about what I said on Twitter and things like that. But like I said, I mean, these things sort of, after a while, when you start seeing these things over and over again, they do wear on you, like the way the government treats Indigenous people and continues to treat Indigenous people. It doesn't matter what party, it doesn't matter if it's the Liberals or the Conservatives or when the NDP come in, I'm sure there'll be disappointments then, right? So to be able to speak out against it is pretty satisfying.
So following the op-eds, you kind of head into this satire.
Yeah.
And why did you create and want to create WalkingEagleNews.com and, as you say, set fire to a 20-year career in journalism?
Because, you know, it was time to do something else, and I've always wanted to do something else, and I've always threatened to leave journalism time and time again. And I have to do different things over the past few years. I went and worked in Alberta for a while. I set up I helped work on a film festival, these sort of things. So it was an important thing to do, and it's following a dream again because this humor was something that I have a background in. So it's nice to actually do it, and to see that people actually like it is even better because it was a bit of a gamble. I didn't know what people would say. I mean, it could have fell completely flat, and people could have looked at it and said, "Oh, you know, what is this guy doing?" Right? So for people to actually like it and to react the way they did is a pretty big relief. So. Yeah.
What were some of your fears or concerns, or what was going through your mind when you were getting ready to publish that first story?
I didn't put my name on it first, and I guess that was kind of on purpose. Like I kind of did. The very first story I published, my name was on it because of a glitch in the software that I was using, and so some people that I knew saw it and knew that it was me, and so that was a bit scary, but. Yeah, it was just fear. Like I just thought, you know, I was nervous, but at the same time, I was really sort of like giddy, right? Like this is what I've always wanted to do. So I was excited, scared, the whole thing. Yeah.
We're gonna get into talking much more about Walking Eagle News. So we got to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with former journalist Tim Fontaine to talk about his new role as the founder and editor and grand chief of WalkingEagleNews.com. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest is Tim Fontaine, a distinguished journalist with a 20-year career, one he describes as recently setting on fire and dancing on its ashes. He's now the founder and head writer, as well as the editor and grand chief of Walking Eagle News. Tim, we were talking about what it was like, you know, some of the concerns, fears you had putting up those first few stories. It's been feels like a couple of weeks, or it feels longer, but it's been a short period of time.
It hasn't been. I think it's been just over a week, but I've been turning them out like crazy. Like I'm writing, I don't know. There's close to 30 stories on there now, and you know what? When you're making fake news, it's a lot quicker than when you're writing real news. So it's a lot easier because, you know, I don't have to worry about spelling people's names, right? Because they're in my head anyway. So it's just, I mean, the only ones where, the only real people I tend to use are politicians. And that's because I think that's fair game. Like in any society, in any culture, politicians are often the butt of jokes, and so I don't feel bad about that. So, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun now, and I'm really enjoying it. Still enjoying it. So.
Like you say, you mentioned some politicians by name. You take some jabs at the Assembly of First Nations quite often.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard any feedback from these stories?
I haven't heard directly from anybody there. I'm curious about it. I don't think that it's necessarily like really mean-spirited, so I don't think that they can be overly offended by it. I don't really know. Somebody sent me a photo, and I don't know if it's real or not, but it was one of the executive council laughing their head off, and supposedly they were reading one of the stories. So I'm hoping that that's true. But I mean, at the same time, they got to be used to that by now. I'm sure they take harder hits than a story about them having a locker room, which is how they exist in the walking eagle universe. Is they're almost like a college football team, and that's how I've envisioned them. Like they have headdress lockers, and they haze each other and all of these sorts of things, which somehow people actually believe. That was the crazy thing.
Yeah, you mentioned some people believe them, and it's interesting to watch the comments and things that come through. What's been the response, and is it what you expected to a couple of weeks of these stories being out there?
I didn't think people would believe it as much as they did, but people continue to believe it, and I still get messages today saying, this is ridiculous, like this is an outrage, how can this be true, whatever the story is. And that's worked, and that's funny sometimes, as long as I'm not trying to make a fool of anybody, and I'm not purposely setting out to sort of mislead people either, or create fake news in this age of, like, the way we see it, the way Trump sees fake news, which is it's purposely misleading. It's fun. I do it because I think it's funny, but it's backfired so far once, and in a very serious way that I still feel bad about. And that was a story that we had done about. I always say we too, like we're this massive newsroom, but a story that I ran about the MMIW inquiry, and I feel bad about that one because it wasn't. The story in the Walking Eagle universe was that it was that an inquiry had been called into the inquiry, which I thought was funny. I still think it's kind of funny. But because there was so much confusion and so much things happening around the inquiry, people took it serious, or people didn't know what they were reading, and that felt pretty bad. And I pulled the story and sincerely apologized, and still sincerely apologize, because that's not the type of humor I want to do. So, yeah.
Was that something you got feedback on?
Secondhand feedback we got. There were some people that had contacted me that I trust and said, there's some families that are genuinely confused by this, and that was tough to hear, because it's not what I want to do. I don't want our people to ever be the butt of any of the jokes on the site, and that's a community, the MMIWG community, that's suffered enough now. And I think that when you, anytime, even though it was never my intention for them to be the butt of the joke, and they weren't in the story, to cause any other level of harm or discomfort for them is really too bad. And that wasn't what I intended to do. So.
Do you think there's other issues out there that are off limits?
Yeah, I haven't crossed them yet. I know that for sure MMIW is. I am pretty cautious of that, because I don't want to. I mean, I think anything to do with, like, the myth of the crooked chief, the myth of alcoholism and drugs and all of these things, I think I'm going to steer pretty clear of that, because there's enough of that, and there's enough people that might fall for that or use it against our people. And I don't. This is humor for us first, and humor to make us feel good first before other people get it even, I think. So that's kind of where I want to keep it.
You mentioned that one unfortunate case, but the stories are creating some laughter, being shared thousands of times. Was this a response that you expected?
Yeah, no, I didn't expect it to be this intense. Like, I get media interviews. I mean, I'm sitting here talking with you now. That was not what I expected at all. I thought a couple of people would see it and laugh and know that it was me, or just get a kick out of it. But the response has been absolutely incredible. Just the amount of people that are checking it out and sharing it and talking about it. My landlord contacted me today and said, "Oh, I saw this site. I saw your site. This is hilarious." So stuff like that is like it's shocking almost. Like it's a really nice surprise, but it's also pretty shocking that 2 weeks ago I was still a recovering journalist, and now I'm seen as a humorist, which is what is it? A satirist? A satirist? I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's me now. So it's hilarious.
Why was the decision at first? You know, people that you and I have even worked with were like, "Who is this person?
Yeah.
Who could this be?" And I saw the story with the byline, so before it was gone, so I knew. But why did you want to keep it your name off there at first?
I didn't know. I didn't know that this is what people did, because I did research on like the big guys like the Beaverton and the Onion, and realized pretty quickly that they put their names on it, and another reason was that some people that I trust in the community contacted me, or were saying they were a bit suspicious of it because they didn't know who was behind it, and there was some fear that it might be an outsider or a non-Indigenous person writing these jokes, and in that case it's sort of kind of a violation. So I thought I better put my name on this and at least come forward and say, like, this is me, if you trust me, and even if you don't, at least we know that it's coming from our community, it's coming from that place. And so it worked out, because that was another thing. I was kind of afraid, like that night that somebody contacted me about that, and I finally just said, you know what, I got to update the About page and put who I really am on there. And the traffic increased, and people seemed to enjoy that it was me, so that it paid off, I think. And it was the right move.
You had some fears of adding your name, though, to it?
Again, yeah, because I didn't know what people were going to say, and I didn't know if this was, maybe that's when it would have died, because people were liking it before that, but then I thought, like, wait, if I put my name on it and I say, oh, hey, this is really weird now, like, I didn't know. I honestly didn't know, but people seem to like it, so.
Maybe walk us through how it works. Like you said, there's 30 or so stories up there already in a little over a week, 2 weeks. How does this all come to be?
Well, I've got my day job now, and so I'm lucky that I can write pretty quick, and some of them are based on jokes that I've told over the years, or things that I've thought were funny that were in my head, and I can expand on them now. They take like 5 minutes to write. It's unbelievable. And so because it's an instinct to write a news story, because that's all I've done for so long, they just come out that way. So yeah, I see something on TV or something that's in the news, and I think something funny, or I think it's funny, and I write it up, and bang, off it goes. And like I said, I've been blessed and fortunate that people share my sense of humor, or at least get it, and so it's working out.
And it's just yourself, right?
I'm doing about 99% of it. I've got a friend of mine who's done, I think, 2 or 3 stories. And I get asked a lot, actually, by a lot of people, can I write for you? Can I write for you? And I'm not ready to do that just yet, because I'm trying to set a tone, and I'm trying to do it right before I start getting other people to, because I don't know what they're going to write, and I don't know if it's going to fit with the site and the kind of tone that we're setting. And also, it's a lot of work. I mean, I don't want to be an editor. I don't have to worry about people. I'm really lazy. So it's nice to have something where it's just like me, and I just have to worry about it, and I don't have to worry about other people's work. So,
like you mentioned, you do have another job, but this writing these stories 3 to 5 a day must take a bit of time. Is there a way to monetize this in any way for yourself?
Supposedly. I mean, I don't think I'm in the I've got, I don't know how many hits now, 100,000 or something like that. Anyways, it's not bad considering it's a little dinky site, but I don't think it's enough to sell ads yet. But apparently, like I've had people say, "Can you set up a Patreon account and I'll give you money?" You know what I mean? Which is like, when does that ever happen? You don't walk down the street and somebody says, you know, "I like what you're doing. Here's a couple of bucks," right? So I might do that. I don't know yet though. And if I do, that's the point when I might actually bring on other writers, because if I make enough money, then I can actually pay for people, because I think people should get paid for the work they do. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I don't know if you're wanting to talk about it, but I understand you've been approached by a potential publisher as well?
Yeah. That was even most bizarre, because I don't even think there was 10 stories on the site yet, and this publisher, I won't give their name because we're not that far in the discussion, but yeah, a publisher came forward and said, we'd love to see a book version of this, and that, I hadn't even thought of that. I've always wanted to write a book, but I thought it would have been a work of journalism and not a work of fake journalism, but I'll take it, sure, why not? So I'm probably going to write something up for them, proposal, and see where that goes. But yeah, that was the ultimate laugh, because it was so soon after I had launched the site that they came forward and said, we love it. So, yeah.
Too bad you're going to miss the busy holiday season with
I
that.
know, yeah, it would have been a I'll make it really small so it fits in stockings.
But Tim does have other things coming up in the new year, and we're going to talk more about that when we come back. We just got to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll be back with more on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Tim Fontaine, former journalist who recently started the satirical news website, WalkingEagleNews.com. And Tim, just wondering, do you have any concerns about those who might feel that some of the stories are making fun of Indigenous people?
Yeah, I think people are getting it. I think I am concerned about that, and that's why I'm very careful about what I write. I write them very quickly, but I also keep that in mind that I avoid negative stereotypes for the most part. I avoid naming real people unless they're politicians. And there's certain things that I don't want our people to be the punchline, and I'm careful about that. And I think that the stories mostly are funny because they talk about the absurdity of some of these situations, some of the things that I've observed. And like a nearly $6 million skating rink, right? I mean, to me, that's absurd. I don't think people realize that. And so twisting that into the fact that there's First Nations that don't have clean drinking water. I wasn't making fun of the fact that there's people that don't have clean drinking water. I think I'm making fun of the fact that this government chose to spend nearly $6 million on an ice rink. So there's stuff like that. I'm careful to balance the truth with the absurdity, and hopefully, I think people seem to agree that it's not mean-spirited. Somebody said that it was gentle, and that's a nice way to see it, I think. Unless you're a politician, and then I'm a little mean, a little more sharp. But yeah.
As some people may or may not know, it's been mentioned in some of the articles. You're working on a show that's going to debut for APTN in the new year. A bit of a replacement for the old Laughing Drum, I guess. What's in store for that?
I don't know yet. I'm making it up as I go along, just like I am with Walking Eagle News. I liked what they were doing with Laughing Drum. I liked that they were bringing humor. It blows me away that there aren't more comedy shows featuring Indigenous people, because we're funny people. I know that's almost like not a stereotype, but it's like we're funny people, and yet we don't see that reflected necessarily in the media. So I want to take it from what it is now, which is like a panel of comedians, and turn it into more something like The Daily Show, and take a funny look at news and how we're covered and this sort of thing, and try and translate some of the humor that I put into Walking Eagle into this Laughing Drum show. And I'm hoping that I can pull it off, because I've never done anything like that before. I mean, I've never done a satirical website before, but I'm hoping that I can have at least a bit of the success of the site on the new show. And thanks to APTN for believing in me enough to give me that opportunity.
Well, I think if it's anything like the website, we'll all be having a good time, having some laughs.
So, yeah.
Most definitely looking forward to seeing the new show, though, and excited to see when it comes out in the new year, and for the additional stories coming up on Walking Eagle News. Tim, thanks so much for joining us, and best of luck on everything that's coming up in the new year. That's all for today and for this season of Face to Face. So thanks for tuning in, and thanks for all of our guests. And a reminder, Face to Face is available as a podcast. You can find that on our website. Thank you for tuning in this season. We'll see you next time.